Welcome to Soul of Travel podcast. I am so happy today to be joined by Juliana Medina, and she is the CEO of Impulse Travel, and I believe is joining me from Cartagena, Colombia today. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, we were so lucky to be able to have met in person when we were both at the Adventure Travel World Summit in Switzerland. So it's always unique, especially having started this podcast in the pandemic, to actually speak to someone that I've met in person. She was on a panel with my friend Rosette DeCool, who's also been on the podcast, and we had such a great immediate connection. I knew that she needed to join me on the podcast for a conversation. So I'm really looking forward to this, and welcome to the show.
Oh, no, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This is my first time in a podcast, and I love podcasts, so I'm very excited.
Oh, good. I'm glad that this can be your first podcast because it already just feels like a friendly conversation. So I'm glad to be able to do that with you. And before we get started, I'd love to give you the chance to introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do in the space of travel.
Yeah, so I'm Juliana. I am a Colombian woman, and I work in tourism industry. And became when I started working here because I needed money to pay for college, and I was studying finance. And I happened to speak German because I was working as an au pair, as a nanny in Germany. So I came back and I found like a source of money. And then I realized that this could be in the power of travel and the power of telling our own story as a guide, as a tour guide. And then later on, then I had my company, then became Impulse Travel. And now what we do at Impulse is that we connect the local communities, change makers, social enterprises with tourism, and a way of creating authentic experiences, and at the same time empowering local communities and to for us as Colombian to build our own story and tell our own story.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I love that so much because, um, as you or my listeners might know, when I started Lotus Sojourns, that was really how I started. Is I wanted to bring travelers to connect with some of the local social impact projects that I knew that supported women, and I thought it was such a great way to actually hear and understand the story of a destination through their eyes and their experience and through supporting these organizations. So I love so much that that is really the foundation for the work that you're doing as well. And I really look forward to sharing more about how that works in impulse travel. One of the things that you and I have talked about in the past, and where I would really love to start this conversation, is um, when we're bringing travelers to a destination, and I know that there's specific destinations that are kind of showcased in the media as having a dark
Mhm.
history, but I really think every country has a dark history. So if we're being fair and honest, I think that gets spun the wrong way in media, which is part of why this local storytelling is so important. But for you, how do you work to bring the ancestral history that is a part of a culture into the experience that travelers are having while working to kind of tell a richer and more inclusive story, and also not try to like soften the impact that, especially in Colombia, that war and drugs have had, but then still creating a space where travelers can connect and begin to understand the context of the destination that they're in. I know this is a super loaded question, but I think, like, as travelers, I think it should be a part of our responsibility to understand the context of where we're going and not just go places to see shiny beaches and these attractions that are in magazines. Like, as travelers, I think we should know where we're going and we should understand how our travel impacts that destination and also really understand where we are. So I think you do this so beautifully, and I would love to just explore this with you.
Yeah, it's funny because when we started, we had this goal of we want travelers to fall in love with Colombia. That's our goal was at the beginning. And we thought that the way of doing that was to show like the nice stuff that we have, like the biodiversity, the nature, that beautiful nature that we have, like how kind and how welcoming our people are, and all those things are true. But it's like, okay, but hide everything else, like people are not gonna make it fall in love with that, with the drug dealing and with the war and with all that. It's like, we keep those things for us and we talk between us, or we don't even talk, like nobody talks about those things. So and then we like start working, and then we got like the guide starts telling us, or me as a guide itself, like people start asking me about those things, like how like about Pablo Escobar time, and then what about the drug dealing, and it's like what is the drug production in Colombia? So and we like we're trying always like to talk a little bit, but always change the subject. Okay, yeah, oh yeah, yeah. In here we have production, but we don't consume, or we don't all that, and then just switch the question. And thinking like about what you just said, I think more than the travelers needed to know everything about a destination, because you don't know everything, and that's why you go there. Because if you know everything, then why you care to go somewhere else? But just like the kind of traveler that I love is the one that are curious and that like don't say like things just like from the beginning, but just wait and ask those questions like how did you live it, or how was for you, and those kind of questions that when you make it to the locals then turns into beautiful conversations that not only make you a wider understanding of the destination, but also for the locals make us think about our own history or the situations that we're going through. For example, when I started as a tour guide in 2013, I started getting all these questions. Of about drugs and all that, and I realized how little I knew, and how actually in school we never talk about it. And we, for example, we were going into a civil wars with guerrillas and with all that, and I realized that I had no idea about anything of that. I knew a lot about the history, I knew a lot about the colonial times, but then in terms of what is going on right now, no one talks of, because since it's still alive, as a teacher, it's like you don't know who's the father of your children, right? So who sides, and like you can get into trouble. So I had to research by myself, and I had to understand and not take sides, and to understand how complex it is in Colombia, the war, and actually how like now we're like just signing this peace agreement and the peace process, and to understand like this war we say is a 70-year war, but actually if you research, it comes from the colony times and before that, and like during the indigenous time, like when we still have a lot of indigenous tribes, but when everything was indigenous in Colombia, um like we used there's a lot of people who says, oh my god, the indigenous, they were like they back then they live in peaceful times until the colony came, and they disturbed everything, and that was not true, right? Like the different indigenous communities fought between each other. So it's like not as it's not like this one the start of the war and this is the end, and understand understand peace as a process, which I think it's important, and that's also what we're doing with the tourism. So what we do is that in our experiences, you visit social enterprises that are finding solutions to solve problems in their communities, and therefore, like they're not maybe solving in the whole country, but every community needs to be in peace and needs to be a strong community working within each other. Just to give you an example, um, and also at the same time for the travelers must be fun. It's not only going to there and listening to sad stories. And it's just, for example, here in Cartagena, there's a fisherman village nearby where we have an experience with a community leaders that have rescued a swamp, a mangrove forest that used to be full of trash, and they clean it up, and now you can do tours around the mangrove forest, and beautiful. You see a lot of birds. Also, you can learn how to fish. But also, what is behind all that is this social project that have empowered a whole community all behind these mangroves, and also hear their stories, and they say like this mangroves is giving them a life, and how they're fighting for the territory, and this is an Afro-Colombian community, and also how they are going back to the roots and rescuing all this Black heritage that we need to be proud of, and all that. And all this is built through tourism. So, and therefore, like if we connect it back with the idea of Colombia, is like not not denying that what we have been going through, and that yes, like Pablo Escobar existed. And yes, we still like we produce a lot of coca in Colombia, but also understanding that coca is a sacred leaf for many of our communities and for us, and it's very helpful, for example, when you have altitude sickness. So and understanding like not everything is white and black. So understanding how wide it is. And for example, is that the war against drugs is not working. And it's not also a war that only Colombia should be fighting. Is that as a war that if all the world should be fighting and we just one part of it. And like all the money that Western countries like United States or Europe have to give it to Colombia for the war to buy more weapons and to buy that, if we have invested in more infrastructure to bring like good roads to this to the villages and to good education and all that, maybe the situation now would be different. And not to regret what just happened, is just to start thinking about it and not blaming us as Colombian as the one guilty for the whole for the war or for the drugs everywhere. So actually, we when we started, like we said, no, we're never gonna talk about Pablo Escobar and all the story. So then we launched a tour in Medellin that is we started calling it Pablo Who, to say like Pablo as a result of everything in the history and just one character and not like the main character. And actually, we're just rebranding it, and we're just gonna launch it in the new marketing strategy for that tour, that it's gonna change the name to We Don't Talk About Pablo.
Mhm.
So, and it's like mixing of this narrative of Encanto that we don't talk about something, it's only gonna make it worse. And we need to talk and then about like, and in Colombia, it's very often that people tell us, oh, we don't talk about Pablo, or we like change the subject. And like we need to talk about those things. We need to talk about what is the drug problems, what is the impact in cities like Medellin. And for example, like it's impressive, like Medellin coming in the 90s at the most dangerous city in the world to be in the now is the most touristic city in Colombia and have won many prizes for being the most innovative city in the world. So they have open air and staircase, and they have a great transport system, and everywhere you can walk freely without problems, without being afraid. And like this is a lot to learn, and I think this is okay. Drop made us all that, but also now is our time to also tell the story that we want to tell about the drop and about all that is about.
Yeah, thank you so much for walking us through that. And I think one of the things that you said in there about, even your process of learning history that you were unsure of, I think that's another thing that is so interesting when you're supporting local guides to share the country, is because a lot of times we assume that we're going to the source that has all of the knowledge, but then again, kind of understanding the context, like we're not sure, you don't know what has been taught through that system. The same as in the US, like our history that we learn is a very sanitized history that I think is evolving. The history that you learn anywhere in Europe, it's so centralized on kind of what a greater influence is telling you should learn. So I think that's a really interesting thing about travel too, is as someone from a destination, you do start questioning the reality that about where you are. When you're empowered to tell your story, you have to understand what your story is. And it's kind of fun to think that you're questioning it from all sides. I guess it becomes a very exploratory process. And for me, I also, what I love about travel is that it does step into all of these spaces, especially once you start thinking about the impact that travel can have. And so it's not just about taking a vacation, it's you start looking at all the pieces, like what has to happen in order for travel to exist and in order for this tour to exist. And then you start to understand local infrastructure, like you were saying, and education and access and community. And all of a sudden, it's this much broader web. And so I really love that you have been able to kind of emphasize the parts and pieces that make travel work and really be authentic in, like, I don't telling all of the parts of travel. Like I think that that's something that we saw after the shutdown of COVID, because we saw who was impacted by the loss of travel. We started to understand how deep and wide travel is, instead
Mhm.
of just like the surface of the hotel and your room and your food and your meal and this very self-focused travel experience. Then you started seeing, the families that were impacted and guides, and like it's just such a broad industry. And I feel like I'm digressing, but I love that is a part of the experience, is like seeing all the pieces. Like nothing is really hidden. It is just like this is what it takes to make tourism work. And I feel like also witnessing the growth of tourism in Colombia has been such an, a really powerful thing. It feels like it has shifted very quickly. And you were mentioning Medellin and the popularity of that destination. And it, for me, from a professional perspective, it went to like hearing not much about Colombia as a destination, or Colombia as a place that like really intrepid travelers would go, or um to all of a sudden every person I knew, it seemed, went to Colombia from like 2020 to now. Like there's so many people who have gone, and so many people talking about, like you said, that innovation, the focus on sustainability, on community based tourism. And like, I was like, wait, what is happening here? And I know it's not all of a sudden, but it's just all of a sudden this awareness or this attention. But what do you think caused that shift, or that shift in perception even? And I don't know if you have felt it from your end, like the way that I saw it from my side.
No, it is. And yeah, Colombia is getting very trendy as a destination. And and of course that comes from the fear that you mentioned before, right? Like um everybody was going, like Latin America always have been a great destination to go. Like people like Latin America. And we're very similar in very many ways, right? Like we speak the same language, and like in our culture we have differences, but a lot of things are similar. So like this joy, dance and all that. So, and I had a lot of travelers that it came and they said, like Colombia was the only one that was missing from the big ones, right? Like I've been to Peru, I've been to Mexico, I've been to Brazil, I've been to Argentina, like, and it was like this country in the middle that looked so interesting but so dangerous that we cannot go. And you have two oceans, and we have like 40% of Colombia is Amazon jungle, and we have three mountain ranges, like we have everything given. We have this beautiful country. So, and then we saw like there was a sign of the peace agreement in 2016. So, like this news of Colombia is open and Colombia is safe to go, it started like spreading around. Even and that's like actually that happened. Like Colombia is very safe to travel since early 2000, but always take your time. And of course, this timing of the peace agreement was like everything everywhere in the news. So people started to come, and also is a great, like, I'm not going to say that I'm grateful completely for the war, because of course we have like me, like thousands of people who died, and we have all suffered the war in many different ways. But the war, or like coming late to the play, also gave us the opportunity to think how we want to do it. So because like you come as a late player, so you can learn from the failures from the ones before. And we like there's still like problems, and now me that I'm inside, I still see, okay, we could be doing better, and I'm working every day to make it better. But it's like this, we're trying and we're coming and we're giving we're trying to give the travelers this experience to like, and which also a very big country, so they can go and spread around and visit our communities, and also the money of travel also not stay always in the same hands. So like there's a lot of boutique hotels, there's a lot of small restaurants, and like not trying to become the destination to stay in a all-inclusive resort with thousands of rooms where everything stays in the same place, like just becoming the rest like the destinations where you can spend 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and always looking something different and going deeply into the destinations. And um, that's our goal. That's a goal as least as a company. And I know for the government also, they are pushing into that direction. And especially kind of Medellin, that is where things are happening the quickly. Also because of the weather, it's very nice weather all year round. Like we call this the city of the eternal spring. I'm located in Cartagena, which is a UNESCO World Heritage City. It's a beautiful architecture. You have very nice sunny beaches nearby and all that. But also Cartagena have been like is an oldest touristic destination. So the moving and there like we have Hilton hotels for a very long time, like since the 90s. So here the things are more developed, but just how everything has switched and have grown so fast in Colombia is very incredible. So right now, where I am as a business owner is like how to surf the wave in the right position, and how to not lose the focus, and how to not like how to make the most of it, because you never know what could happen, right? Like we can have the next pandemic next corner. So, and how to make it sustainable for our communities, how to make it sustainable for us, and how to learn from the others' mistakes.
Yeah. It's such I guess like such a valuable insight to realize that if you had a tourism boom 20 years ago, you would been in, the majority of destinations that were really focused on, cruises, or like you said, all inclusive destinations, serving that niche of, or not niche, that is mass tourism, serving that market. But now, because the knowledge and awareness and information that is surrounding sustainable tourism and community-based tourism is so much more accessible. Like you said, you can start there. You don't have to try to shift that direction. But it is, when you look across the board, very unique for a destination to start there. But because you have that information to build from, you can. So I think that that's amazing. And I think there's a few other places I've seen that have been able to do that. After I was in Switzerland, I went to Slovenia, and they're a country that is also very focused on sustainable tourism and growth management of tourism. And it's because they're starting in this space as well, where they have seen what has happened, and they can say, maybe not all or nothing is not the right approach. And
Mm.
yeah, I think it's really great to be at this point in time where people are really focusing on that and having that as the foundation and not the place to grow towards. Like they can grow from that space. Um, I guess this would be a really good spot to jump into. You and I talked about, in terms of our own businesses, intentional growth, and like really as business owners understanding the impact you want to create and how much you need to scale to make that impact, but then not surpassing that just because it seems like the right thing to do. And then also as a business owner and as a CEO, like feeling happy and balanced in your work, finding what that level is, and just like putting the lid there. What 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 is that like for you? And because I know you've grown a lot recently, and like what has that dance been?
Well, that's still a question that I'm asking myself every day. When we were at the ATTA closing talk, they were talking about like about this conception of infinitive infinitive growth, like always keep growing and growing. And that talk really hit me because I was asking myself the same. Like right now, we're in the group in the team. We're 10. So, and I like it because it's like we like to call ourselves like a high performance group of friends. So we're not family, like family is forever. Like I always felt like, if it's your time and if you need to move on, it's your time, right? Like just to feel like the time that you spend during your time in Impulse is worth it and you feel like you grow within it. But so we are a team of high performance friends. So and then said, okay, we're 10, which is a great number, but do I really want to have like us to be 50, 100, 300? But like, well, you don't even know the names of everyone. Like, you don't know the stories. You don't know like what is going on. And it's like, what does it mean for my life? And is like having more employees or having more, like, is a thing of ego is like, oh, I want to like be so powerful. Like I feel like the life of 300 people depends on me, right? Like I don't think that's what I want in my life. Like I feel that what I do is important for the people. Like I want to feel like the company inside, everybody feels fulfilled and like they're doing something better. But at the same time, then I'm also asking me, okay, maybe you're choosing that and you're choosing to keep maybe smaller and you're then rejecting to grow in and like bring your impact further because like visitors are coming to Colombia and if they don't find your offer, they're gonna find something else. And maybe they're gonna do something else. So it's like what happened if they're looking and they Google and things, experience or tours to do in Colombia, and the only things they find is the same things they're going, like the day trip to the beach or going to the same stories, and there's nothing happening behind. So, like more than me telling you this is, I'm still asking me myself like how to keep that balance in my life because also when you talk like when you work for sustainability you often also feel like, oh my God, what I do is not 100% sustainable, right? Like, is that what happened is like more tourism comes to these small communities, right? Like, which is a small impact. What happens if I want to bring 100 people, 1,000 people a year? And then what happens, like, okay, that's money, and their money can bring into development for them. But then how is that going to impact the culture? So, you have all these questions going on all the time. And so I don't have the answer. I just try to keep it as a life question in my life to not always go with the flow into that and like go with the flow, but not making that portion of not making this growth as a main achievement and just growing for growing, for just to make more money or just to have more people. And is that we're growing is because like that's what like we as a company going to and because it's sustainable and because we're also learning from it.
Yeah. I think it's so great. And I love the idea that you said just kind of keeping that as a living question because there's so many things you have to check up against it. Like you said, if you're running a sustainable business and trying to have impact, then what is that impact? How do you find balance in that? And like you said, you want financial income and revenue and to create that resource for the communities and the social impact organizations you're supporting, but then you have to look at what's the tipping point for that and when does it, like you said, start to impact the community from a way that it starts to shift culture or that they are really evolving to serve tourism instead of tourism serving them, which I think is what we really have seen around the world. And that's where we saw the greatest impact during the pandemic is these communities that really did begin to cater towards tourism. When they had no tourism, they were devastated. So we need to think about what that line is, and we don't know. I mean, that's the other thing is like you said, we don't know that line. It's not like we're like, oh well, we just crossed it. And so you have to keep looking at that. And then I think for me, from the impact that I want to create too is from a like corporate culture standpoint, like you were saying, that you are these 10 people who are working together, who are family. like that's such a unique space in the world of work that I feel like that creates an even more positive impact in the lives of our employees, of the guides, how they interact with the travelers. If they're one of 10 and not one of 1,000, they feel their own value. And that also tells a different story. And so I think like those are all those things you had to juggle. And like I had a exciting thing to be able to hire someone to work for me that it was someone I was like, as soon as I get to the point where I can do this, I want you on my team because you understand so much what I'm trying to do. And then we also have such a kinship. Like what we can create together is so different than just bringing in employees and growing. And then what you put out is so different. So I think it's such a powerful conversation and also something that's kind of new because I think growth for the sake of growth, like you said, has been the paradigm. And now people are like, well, is that what we really need in this world? Like, can we serve better if we only grow to a certain place, which then also allows someone else to come in and bring their gifts into a space that you maybe were trying to fill, but it's not your zone of genius because you were just growing.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, we can start to get pretty philosophical in this space, but I just really loved that that was a part of what we were talking about when we first connected. Another thing that we talked about in this kind of same thread is when you're creating a positive impact, and most of the businesses that come on Soul of Travel are really impact driven, led by women who want to create a positive impact. And I know this is important to you, and that you have actually won the or been recognized by the UNWTO for the global startup competition and your work with the sustainable development goal number 16. And so like this is something that's very important to you. But then as brands, we're looking at how do we tell our story? How do we tell them impact is important to us and still allow them to like to respond as travelers who want to come to a destination, kind of where we started this conversation. Like, do you create the trip that you know they're going to come to and kind of like forget about the other parts of your environment and your country and your destination because you know that's what they're going to come for. But in the end, they're going to realize they can create a positive impact. They're going to hear the story. Like you're not going to not ask your guide a question about their life. So things are going to start to surface and you're going to understand. It's such an interesting place to be in when you're not just saying like, here's this relaxing vacation that's going to meet all of your needs and it's kind of superficial, when you really want them to know that this will impact their lives and impact the lives of the people around them. How do you bridge that? And again, I know there's no answers, but what has that been like for you to kind of navigate that balance?
I feel like when people go on vacation, it's like they can show they do stuff, right? Like there's um and when they go on vacations, like they wanna feel like they wanna be free. And for some people, it's just going on a day on the beach and like having quiet because their daily life is so stressful. So they feel like they want to escape. And that escape is just laying on the beach for a whole day. And there's other people that feel that for them, their reality is doing something extreme, going rafting or going. So there's all people that ever, by any reason, because normally it's by accident, they turn or they end up in these travels that are transformative and knowing the local culture. And I think it's very few people that actually start up a trip like that from the first time. It's just that for some reason they ended up there and then they love it and then they keep looking for that. Or they have a friend that maybe very strongly recommend it. But it's like the first, like going into this kind of travel is very hard. So when we won the booking booster competition, we changed the whole website to make it like we're the super and not like a super impactful company. And if you're gonna come with us, you're gonna be transformed and you're gonna be that. And like, all our trips have this impact and have all that. And then we realized that it was not working. It was not working first because like normally going back to this first through the first sentence, it's like when you go into vacations and you want to be your true self, like maybe that's those words like transformative, impactful, sound like too big for you. Just you just want to have fun maybe in this moment of your life. So, and the other is because, like making a promise that my trip is going to be transformative is a big statement, right? And normally the trips, you realize the word transformative way long time after they happens, right? Like you can tell that maybe at least 6 months after they happen. Or then you can tell, maybe you can say, oh, this was special, but really to me, like to understand what it meant for you, that happens and that takes time. So that's why we don't want that to be like our statement or our value proposition. Like with us, with this trip, you're gonna get transformed. Even now, like that's what a lot of our guests says about the trips is like, okay, we want them to discover that and encounter that, and because not because they are expecting it to be that. So, and also because they we what we're trying to do is that how can we offer the things they're looking for and they like having fun. And for example, as I explained, just going into the fishermen and learning, like going into the mangroves, which is very nice nature and feel the quietness, and then meeting these people. And I feel not everybody has the luxury of taking a 6 month trip where you can go very slowly into the destination and meet the locals and stay there and take the time to build those relationships. Um, but then, like what we just like to offer, like this kind of maybe express experiences that can go deeply into it, but at the same time are also I'm losing the words, but it's like also from a community perspective, it's a very short encounter. So always telling my story, I want to do it in a very precise way that also doesn't like empower me and not decrease me, and it's not always feels like a therapy. Even sometimes it is, but it's not like, oh my God, I'm so poor and I'm this and all that. But it's just empowering. I've built this and I've done this and I did this. And look how fun it is to learn how to play the drums, for example. We have another experience that is called Drums in the Beach, or we have another experience in Medellin that is called the Afro Tour. So we learn how to play the drums and we feel this music and all like the meaningful of the music in Colombian history. So it's like you as a traveler have a fun time. So you learn how to play the drums, you listen to music, but what is going behind is also very cool. So it's for us also trying to mention find a balance. And actually that also leads to a very interesting experience that I just had last week. That um, I don't guide that much anymore. Like I used to guide every day, sometimes even 100 times a day. And then, but then I went more into the business, we're doing trade, or scouting, and all that. But then last week was definitely high season. So we needed a guide in German, but our guide was kind of getting sick, so I had to jump and be back on the streets. So and the tour that I had to do was a cruise ship tour, and I normally really don't like cruise ship tours because cruise ship travelers, and even they were going actually to this fisherman village in one of our experiences, and but normally the cruise ship travelers they're not that well informed, and they're criticize a lot, and they're like I don't know, like they're not this kind of travelers where you can get conversations. Um, but anyway, I did it. So I went with them, and it was a group of 10, and they were from Germany. And as soon as they landed, they started like criticizing and talking about how crazy the traffic was. And then we were driving into this particular village, and the area is that the houses are very simple infrastructures, and like the materials are made of wood, or maybe there's some trash in the streets and all that. And then one woman in the group told me, "Oh my God, I don't understand. I don't see how can people live like this and I don't think I would be happy living in a place like this. And I remember myself from many years when I started guiding, and I would answer, I would just avoid it or say, "Oh, I know," I just keep it like that, right? Because what do you answer to things like that? First, I find it very rude to someone coming to my country. Maybe you can think it, but say it out loud to me as a local, and it feels very rude, like telling me, "How could you live happily in a place like this?" Like I like it. But then this time, what I did is I started a conversation about what is actually happiness. So then I asked her, like, okay, so what do you think is makes you happy, or do you really think people in Germany having everything is truly happier than the people here? You know, like now you go see, people just go to the sea and they fish, so they're not starving. That's what I can promise. Like in this place, in this specifically neighborhood, they're not starving, and and like look at them, they're all with their families. Look at sitting outside, they have time and they all that. So like, do you think that's really like what's happiness and all that? And like she said, yeah, but like this basic, and I'm used to those kind of things. And it's like, okay, yeah, you might be right. It's like, um, you're used to certain kind of things, and those are your standards. But maybe for those standards, where the price that you're paying, so, what is like the time that you have? Like, what is the family for us? For example, I was explaining as Colombians, it's very important to be grateful. So we practice the grateful, like when eating or when in our daily life, and it's like, and when I was in Germany, like people were like complaining all of the time about everything. Like the train is 2 minutes late and all that. And then we visited the community, and then we got to the fishermen, and they started explaining like how it was so important to keep this Black heritage, and how like they have been empowered by all that, and how like they were making jokes and all that. So when we came back on the way back to the city, I was asking like, "What do you think?" And said, "Yeah, like she, of course, she didn't change her mind immediately, but I could feel that she was not just giving that as a statement anymore." So, and also that's what we're doing and what we're trying to create with the trips, not for us telling the truth of all the time, like, like we here, Colombians perfect, and this is all of these things. It's just to build conversations, and and that's also what tours and experience won't replace. I see more and more travelers that are just booking the accommodation, going to the restaurants, going to the beach and going home. And they don't book experiences to go deeply to understand something. For example, we have another experience here that is visiting indigenous communities to learn how to weave, a technique that is called flecha. And so you learn how to weave, which is very, very beautiful technique, but also learn the history of what it means to be an indigenous community, lives in the city, like this identity, how has evolved been to be indigenous or not, and all that, and having all these conversations about also the indigenous communities back home, right? Like with the Americans, like how it is back home. So, and also start asking us the question, and not the conversation going in one way. And this is a work, and that's why it's so important, the guides and all like this training. Now we were doing like a lot of sessions of training for our guides to also train in having these meaningful conversations, especially because I learned a book that really impacted me last year, that it was called Beyond Guilt Trips. I don't know if you have a chance to read it, which is a lot about that, about having this conversation and helping digest the realities that we are going through. So, but then actually, that we started, like, we came with the idea of launching a podcast with our guides, just for the guides, for like having about these conversations, and not like sometimes they couldn't make it to the session, and it's not like it's recorder, like they have to watch the video, which is very heavy. So I actually think that you talked to me about the podcast for the industry. I thought, oh my god, maybe this is the solution for us with our guides, to also deliver these conversations and to have this knowledge.
Yeah. Um, Gosh, there's so many things from that I wanted to focus on. And now
Right.
I'm just happy that I'm having the conversation and I got lost in it for a moment. But I think it's so important. And as you were talking about, the guest that you were, um, bringing in from the cruise ship and that conversation, it really reminded me of of ones that I've had in the past as well, and where people, I think, it's such human nature to notice the differences when we're traveling. And so, and then with that difference, you notice the discomfort, or like, I don't know why we lean towards negative instead of towards positive, but I do feel like that's a way that our brain starts to like to process information. But I love that you asked that question of, do you think this is actually equaling happiness where you're from? Because in fact, so many travelers are traveling because they're feeling like loss or unhappiness, or they're needing to like recharge, like you said, or just relax. And so, um, it's really interesting to ask those questions. And when I've traveled with people and they start to notice that, like I've done the same thing, like, what about that to you says unhappiness or sadness or, despair, or these things that they're saying they're witnessing. And, then they question that. And much like you said, like the time that it takes away from your life to produce in order to have the income in order to buy the thing. And like, is that joy, or is the fact that maybe you have less money but you have all this time with your family? Like, I find when I travel, especially to what we would call developing countries, that I'm so envious of that community and that time that families have. And this, like, I'm often being fed this meal from a local farmer or from their own properties. And it's such a bounty. Like, I start to question, like, what is wealth? What is happiness? What is abundance? Like, how are we measuring that? And those are the conversations that start to make me feel really excited to like to kind of shift paradigms. I feel like you and I are trying to shift every paradigm right now. But
Yeah.
like, I'm like,
Mm.
to me that's joy, like to be able to spend all that time. And also when I was younger, like my grandmother had a huge garden and fed our whole family. So for me, there's a part of my heart that resonates with that being joy. And so I see that and I'm like, no, to me, that's happiness. Like, I don't need a TV and a like new car and all these things. Like, I miss family like that. And so I think it's so great to have those conversations and to just like push people's comfort level a little, to have it both ways. And like you said, for the guides to be able to ask questions, or communities to ask, like, well, what's this like in your country? Or because we don't think about that a lot. Like when we go out and travel, we have this curious mindset, but when we're home, we just like submerge into our surroundings. And so travel really, like, if it can be an equal exchange like that, and you can start to question on both sides of the conversation and not have it be this interrogation of the destination where you're at and it's under fire, like, flip that mirror, like, take that backwards and ask the same questions. So I really love that you did that, and that you're also working with your guides to cultivate that conversation. Oh, and the book that you mentioned, Beyond Guilt Trips, by Dr. Anu Taranath, is definitely one I highly recommend. I interviewed her on the podcast. So anyone listening, I would definitely recommend going back, listening to that, and reading the book, because that was a huge shift for me as well. Like, I just read the preface of that book and I emailed Dr. Tarnath and I was like, oh my gosh, I have been waiting for this book. Like, I've only read the preface and I already know this is the way I've wanted to think about travel. So, well, before we end our conversation, I just really quickly wanted to talk about community and the importance of community, especially for women as travel leaders. And um, for me, I know that support and that community, especially as a solopreneur right now in my business, has been so important. But I was wondering how that has impacted the growth of your business, or like as you stepped in as a woman in the industry, running your own company, like, what have you been surprised by, or how have other women supported you? Because I have really seen that women see me and see my vision, and then they're like, aha, like this is the thing I think would really move the needle forward in your business. And I was really surprised by that level of camaraderie, or like the willingness to make sure that my business was thriving and really find that support. But what has that looked like in your business, or what have you found?
Um, I don't know, like, as when I was teenager, I used to have a lot of male friends, and I had this idea of that I didn't have a lot of female friends, and like there was envy, and there was a lot of that. And actually, that is also this misconception that we as women built on ourselves. And then suddenly, when like 5 years ago, I just questioned myself that like is it really true that you cannot because also I was having a lot of opportunities given by men that want like were conscious and they wanted to bring women into the field. So like I was like getting called for bigger groups or like given the trust and I knew there was a part of like them, like, oh my God, like let's go with this young girl, like it's very passionate and like she's like giving her the opportunity, you know? And I feel like also being a female kind of like played a role and helped me and gave me some chances, which is normally the opposite with a feel, but I feel for me for that. So, but then I started asking, like questioning myself, like what I'm doing with the community and what I'm doing and about this misconception. So I started to reach out more to women and to ask them for help and to, for example, I'm part of an association here in Colombia that is called Acotur, and it's like the Responsible Travel Association. And there's a lot of women there, but I was always hanging with with the men in the industry, which is the most because no one is alive that in the travel industry there's mostly women, but we talk about the leaders, there's mostly men. So I was like always talking with the men and trying to hanging out with the men in the group. Um, because we're the one with bigger companies and all that. But then it was like, hey, what about us women? What about like us in these same associations? What are we doing? And also something that I realized is that sometimes it's not enough of empowering. It's not enough of saying, okay, yes, us women, we can do it. We need sometimes to push each other into the water. So because no matter how much we repeat ourselves, we can do it, we don't believe we can. So it's not until someone else throws us into the water and then we realize we can swim. So that what I'm doing is like to be consciously like working more like with local owners, like hotel owners that are women and giving them like chances and helping them how to like bigger groups or more complicated groups and like luxury things and all that. And they normally would go with men. And it's not in terms like men versus women. It's just like how actively I look for those things and push people into the water. For example, I had a group that wanted to be lead completely by women. So women guides was easy, but women drivers, that was very hard, especially with big cars. So I have to make call like in social media, like I'm looking for female drivers all around Colombia and all that. Very few came, but I needed one for a big bus. So and I couldn't find it until I asked one of our a male driver that we have, like I'm looking for that. I'm looking for a woman to drive a bus. Like maybe you know someone that you can borrow the bus to lend the bus and said, okay, my wife can do it. She parks it and she used it and then she did. So and this thing like and then she kept driving, you know, like and if you maybe you would ask her like from nothing with no chances, hey, why don't you become a driver and knock on people's doors? Maybe the door's not gonna open. Like sometimes like what I think is most important is for us to trust other people or this was something that I learned not that long ago is that I used to say, do it even when you're fearful. Right now, I don't believe that. I think like fear has a goal in our life, and fear tell us to run or tell us that we are not prepared for that. So, and to listen to that fear, it's like, yes, you're maybe not prepared for that. So then what do you need to ask the people that in there in fear, like what tools you're missing to feel like you can do it. Because sometimes like when you're so fearful to doing something, maybe you don't do it right, right? Because you feel like you don't deserve or you're not able to do it. So to ask people that are in fear or they're in this situation, like what do you need to feel that you're capable of doing it? And maybe I can help you or I can connect you with you. So then you feel more like capable of. Um, and so sometimes just saying, oh, you can is not enough. So, and this is like now as my business now with this Agriculture Association, we're planning retreat only for the women in there to like keep talking and also because as women we face sometimes these situations about like yeah, not feeling that we're capable and not feeling that we're worth it. So like and this is something also something that only we as a woman can feel among ourselves and we can empower ourselves by showing examples and going into the weather again.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I feel like I'm so glad that that's where we ended the conversation. That was some really really beautiful wisdom. I love the idea of how we can throw each other into the water, and I think that comes like with our belief in one another too. Like I think I love what you said about fear, but I think also sometimes we do hold ourselves back and don't believe in ourselves. So someone that just pushes us in the water and then we're like, "Oh wait, I'm swimming." Like that's so valuable, but also to honor that fear and like you said, then don't let that be the stopping point though, being like, what do you need to overcome that fear? What support do you need? What do you need to learn to not have fear, to have more comfort, to be able to do that? I think both of those things are so valuable. So thank you so much for sharing that. As we end the conversation, I have a couple rapid fire questions for our audience to get to know you a little bit more as a traveler. And then, yeah, I'm so grateful. This is such a fun conversation. The first one is, what are you reading right now?
Um, oh my God, I'm very bad with names. Is Reinventing Organizations is the name in English.
What is that again? Sorry.
Reinventing Organizations is a
Reinventing.
very yeah, it's a very cool book. It's about how we can think about organizations in a different ways about like self self and translating the words in English, but is how can we create an ambience where everybody feels needed, where you don't have to be telling everybody what to do and everybody feeling part of something bigger. And yeah, it's a great book if you're into strategical and transparent and all that. Very recommended.
Perfect. That goes right in our flipping the paradigm conversation as well.
Yeah.
What is always in your suitcase or backpack when you travel?
Um, in my menstrual cup, I would say it's the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah,
'Cause you never know when you're gonna need it, right? But anything else? Just a book. It's okay.
yeah. To sojourn is to travel somewhere as if you live there for a short while. Where is a place that you would love to sojourn?
Place that is in my mind that that I always felt like I was not ready to, but now I'm feeling more that I'm ready to go is India. I've never been to India, and I knew there was not a place just to go and there, so you have to feel like you're ready for. And I'm feeling like I'm closing there.
Oh, I love that that's how you shared about it. I have felt the same way. Like I felt like India is a place that my soul wants to visit, and yet like I needed to be ready to receive whatever was waiting for me and also to experience just the destination. But I'm traveling with my daughters for a year soon, and I think I know so many women there who have invited us and extended open arms and invitations. So I think it might be coming, which is interesting because then I feel like I'm taking my daughters there before they might be ready, but maybe they are ready. I don't know. So, but I love that you shared about it that way. What do you eat that immediately connects you to a place that you've been?
Well, there's a soup that is called mote de queso, which is a soup made of cheese and a local root that's called ñame, so yam, and onion. And it's a very simple soup, but it just reminds me of being in the backyard of my grandma's, and I feel like the heat, and I feel like eat like the yellow, like everything's so yellow because it's so hot here. So this is what comes to mind.
Who was a person that inspired or encouraged you to set out and explore the world?
My father. My father is my father, my mother, but especially my father has this like travel spirit, and it's very funny because he always came back from the travels, from the trips, and he always telling the story to my. I have two brothers, and they were telling a story of us, and he always wanted my brothers to become the travelers, and they didn't, and I did, and he's told me many times like why you? Why like why you have to be the one going as an au pair for a year, being so young? Why you have to go to these adventures? And not that long ago, we did a trekking trip, just the two of us, which is was like at this like closing like going into adventure. And for the very first time, I was stronger than my father, so I have to like slow down the pace and like talking to them and to feel like this was a me a way of thanking him when he pushed me into adventure without him wanting me to, and now me like pushing him into doing this long trek maybe when he wouldn't done it by himself.
Wow, thank you. If you could take an adventure with one person, fictional or real, alive or past, who would it be?
It's not really good discussions. A trip. It's, I would take. Oh, I would take there's a character in Colombian history that she's called La Pola, and she was like working for the independence process, and she got killed, and before she died, she said like uh, even that I'm young and a woman, I'm not fearful for dying for what is right. So in her life, just to go on a trip with her and see how she was like looking like this rebellious time. For her would be going on a trip in Colombia, like going into the jungle with her, like going into a trip that would be very cool and very awesome. I know she would be prepared for everything.
I love that. Well, solo travel is a space for honoring the voices of women. Who is one woman in the travel industry that you admire and would like to recognize in this space?
A woman. Um, Gabby from ATTA, Gabby Stowell. And I think she has such a great light, and she always look for people to be like in the hiding spot to bring it be there in the place. And she has such a way of empowering, like not empowering, like giving you like empowering words. It's just like as I said, right? Like she talks to you and you can or what you did is so important, and this or connecting people together. So yeah, I, I think so.
Thank you. That's also a beautiful kind of full circle moment because she is the first guest on my podcast. And through our conversation, then I realized that I wanted to focus on the voices of women in tourism. And so that feels like a beautiful thing to be able to recognize her here for that as well. So thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I hope that our listeners really took away some ways of thinking differently about travel and thinking about our impact. And hopefully, we're just inspired to get out there and travel and really be intentional and curious and have fun with their experiences as well.
Thank you so much for having me. It was very fun. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.